So I definitely feel like I had to make this video as a massive Richmond fan and give you guys my thoughts and opinions on what I think could possibly have been one of the biggest upsets I have potentially ever seen in my time of watching the AFL. And for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, we recently just had the 2025 AFL Round 1 kicked off with the Richmond Football Club taking on Carlton. And essentially, why this is like majorly different to every single Round 1 we have seen in most years is because there was an absolute consensus winner, and there was a consensus winner who was supposed to win by, well, I guess some people were tipping 100 points. Now, again, in most years, yeah, Richmond have been the favourite, but there's always been certain optimism that Carlton could, potentially get a win, especially when they were rebuilding and on the rise. But in this most recent year where Richmond have had an off season where they pretty much traded everyone and their dad, you had guys like freaking Dustin Martin all the way to legendary footballer Sam Naismith retiring. It just seemed like the Tigers were very, very far off. And as we know, most people were tipping them to finish last. So it was a major surprise when the team who was tipped to finish last would come out and beat Carlton, a team that a lot of people had tipped to make the top four. And of course, they would beat them, and they would beat them in a very, very exciting fashion that has had, I think, all Richmond fans kind of squirting garlic aioli sauce out of their private parts. It was pretty exciting. I mean, speaking of private parts, I don't think Sam Lawler had to come out there and do what he did to those Blue Baggers. Again, it's bad enough that the Blues got, destroyed by an 18-year-old who had never played a game in his life, but he had to go and follow that up by kicking an insanely good goal against them and then whipping his cock out and practically slapping them in the face with it. Again, him slapping them in the face with it might have been a bit of an exaggeration, but it's not like I can show you for those of you who haven't seen it, because this video would 100% get taken down. But it's the point of most people have seen it, and it's gone pretty viral to the point where Sam Lawler actually posted on his Instagram talking about the win and put an eggplant emoji at the end of it, basically, obviously, kind of referencing his eggplant. But other than Sam Lawler freaking flashing the whole entire Carlton Football Club, it was an insane game, and it really started off with a first half that I think was not only really, really poorly coached by the, Richmond team, but also it was a first half where Carlton were able to absolutely dominate them in practically all facets of the game. And they ended up getting to a point where I believe they were up by 43 points at one stage, or 41 points, and just looked like they had absolute control. Again, Uze's game style really didn't look like it had evolved from last year, which was already a game style that people had criticised. And there was just no ball movement. The midfielders like Tim Taranto and Jacob Hopper looked insanely slow and just uncompetitive, and they looked like there just needed to be a lot of changes. So in saying that the Richmond Football Club had one of the worst coaching halves I had seen in, the last couple of years for the Tigers, they ended up completely flipping the script like Eli turning into Hawk in Cobra Kai, and having one of the better coaching performances I have seen from Richmond in the last couple of years, with Adam Uze completely changing the team. Again, for starters, Jacob Wiedering, who was absolutely dominating the Tigers in the first half, actually ended up having a very, very minimal effort in the second half, where I think he only had a couple disposals, and that was all because Adam Uze decided to have Jacob Bauer, the second or third key forward option, go and tag Jacob Wiedering, which is rare that you see. You don't usually see key defenders get tagged, but Adam Uze decided to put Bauer on Wiedering, completely minimalizing, Jacob Wiedering's effort And not only was that changing the game, but Jacob Bauer, who was also having a terrible game and had no role, was actually finally able to do something and have an impact on the game. Again, in the first half, Bauer as well was playing a lot of ruck minutes and was getting destroyed and killed every time he was in there. So he was actually taken out of that as well. And Camden McIntosh would end up going in the ruck and competing really, really well, to the point where not only was he able to play as a midfielder who was tagging Patrick Cripps, which Richmond don't usually go and tag, but he was able to play a critical role as the second ruckman, and he did quite good against most of the players Carlton had in there, like Mackay and Cripps. And even on the one or two chances he was on deconing, actually held his own, and that was another great move that Adam Uze decided to do in the second half. There were other moves as well that Uze did, such as having Tom Lynch therefore not being on Wiedering and moving him, up the ground a lot more, which worked out quite a bit. Again, Sam Lawler started changing from forward to midfield in that second half, which really opened the game up. Jack Ross, again, a guy who was said to be a big midfielder this year, actually played a lot of high half forward minutes and had the best game I've ever seen him have, with 28 disposals and 2 goals. And the back line also held up really well. The back line, as we knew, was going to be Richmond's strength going into this year, but we didn't actually know it was going to be as good as it was against Carlton. Even with the really bad first half, the backline was actually holding up really well and could have had a lot more than, the 41 points that they were down scored on them. They could have been absolutely killed, but the mix of veterans and young players like Tom Brown, Luke Traynor, and Sam Banks and Trezise rotating from the wing down to half back was absolutely critical, and there wasn't a single one of them who played bad at all. Again, this is really, really crazy considering the Richmond Tigers were not only tipped to finish last, but they were tipped to not win a game by a lot of experts out there. And what we saw from the Tigers is not only has their coaching looked like it had evolved with Uze and other coaches that he has in there doing a lot of different changes, more changes than we practically saw in the whole entire of last season that really benefit the team, but it also had a great burst from the new draftee trio that the Tigers had. And what I think was most important, the young players who the Tigers have drafted over the last couple of years, who no one has really been talking about because they've just, quite frankly, not been that good since they've been in the AFL, absolutely exploded against Carlton, with former first round pick Sam Banks having his best ever game in the yellow and black. You had a guy like James Trezise, who wasn't a high pick, but he was a young guy who was just pretty average in every game that he played with the Tigers. He had his best game. Again, I think Thompson Dow probably had his best game ever in the yellow and black. Again, he still couldn't kick to save his life, but everything else he did around the ground was really, really good. Again, the small forwards like Seth Campbell, he had a really good game, and even a guy like Ryan Mansell, who didn't exactly hit the stat sheet, there were a lot of great things he did, like in the second half, where he knew he was going to get absolutely smacked by one of the Carlton defenders' knees in the ribs, and he took on that knee, and I think he was able to tap it forward where Lawler or Ross was able to get onto it, and of course the Tigers ended up kicking a goal. I think it ended up getting to Ross and then passed to Lawler, and Lawler just streamed through, kicked the goal, and then flashed the whole entire freaking audience with his, his private parts, pretty much. So there was a lot of really, really good to take out of this game from Richmond. It was the best game that Richmond have played since the Damien Hardwick era. And not only was it a good game of football with the coaching, with the system, and with the young players, but I think it's actually going to build to something that could end up being like a 5 or 6 win season, which, even though that doesn't sound like a whole lot, 5 or 6 wins is still 5 or 6 wins more than what a lot of people were tipping them to have. So they now go into the game against Port Adelaide with a ton of confidence. And this is a Port Adelaide team who right now at the time making this video are getting absolutely freaking touched with their consent by the Collingwood Football Club. They're like down by over 100 points right now. So you got a team like Port who looks like they could be on the decline, and they look like half their self from last year, and a team like Richmond who historically have had a pretty good run at the Adelaide Oval. They could come out and absolutely shock Port Adelaide here, and even though Port will probably still be the favourites, let's be honest here, there is still a chance that Richmond could come out and do this and start the season 2-0, which 99.999% of the people wouldn't have expected. Again, will they beat Port? Maybe not. They probably still won't. But at the end of the day, the fact that we're even talking about them actually having a decent, solid chance here is absolutely insane. Something I didn't expect going into this year at all. So I think it's very important that we talk about Richmond and their game against Carlton here in round one, because it was one of the biggest upsets in history. I've never seen a team who was not only predicted to win no games, because you never see teams who were predicted to win no games, but I've never seen a team who was predicted to be so goddamn bad and they come out in the first game and beat a team that a lot of people thought was going to be a top four. It never ever happens. Carlton were like $1.05 favourite. It is probably the biggest upset that I've nearly seen, watching footy. It doesn't happen, and the Tigers genuinely looked really, really good. So I'm interested to hear all of your thoughts and opinions on this down below. Of course, I want to know, especially if you're a Richmond fan or even if you're not, what are you guys' expectations for the Tigers going forward this year? Because there was definitely a lot to look forward to, and I think a lot of shocks and surprises from the Tigers overall. Again, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for all that sports content and news, as well as subscribing to my gaming channel, which will also be linked in the description down below. As I was saying, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and comment your thoughts and opinions all down below. And I guess I will be seeing you guys next time. Goodbye.